Good evening. Will HS2 prove to be the runaway train project whose budget grew and grew, but it hit the buffers in the Midlands, never to reach Leeds or Manchester? Even if it does reach the north, the cost per mile in today's money is £33 million and counting. Add to that, according to a report by the Institute of Government, the accelerated shift to electric vehicles blows a hole in the environmental case for the super rail. So is the project now behind the times, out of control, and destined to go down in history as the biggest vanity project of all time? Newsnight has learned that figures at the top of government have now lost confidence in HS2 Limited, the company running the project, amidst doubts over whether the entire line will ever be built. From Leeds, here's our economics editor, Ben Chu.
High-speed rail between London and Birmingham has the official go-ahead. But will HS2 ever arrive in the north of England? That's the question being whispered in Whitehall now. And the fear being increasingly voiced in places like Leeds is that it won't.
My heart sinks. It's incredibly depressing. And unfortunately, it is the state of play at the moment.
Here's one of the reasons why. The planned northern legs of High Speed 2, known as Phase 2B, connecting Crewe and Manchester, and Birmingham and Leeds, got a red rating from the government's own Infrastructure Projects Authority last month. Red means successful delivery of the project appears to be unachievable. There are major issues with project definition, schedule, budget, quality and/or benefits delivery, which at this stage do not appear to be manageable or resolvable. This verdict has prompted some to conclude that the government is now poised to scrap HS2's northern legs. Further, another body, the Independent National Infrastructure Commission, has argued that if state money is tight, upgrading existing lines in the north would deliver more benefits than building new high-speed lines.
Overall, we felt that there was more benefits and more economic benefit to be had by focusing on the east-west rail improvements rather than just focusing on north-south. Indeed, you can see that many people make the majority of their journeys east-west rather than the majority of their journeys north-south. So we said it's been a long-standing need for these east-west improvements, and therefore it would be best to make sure we get those built first and perhaps follow on later with, for example, the eastern leg of High Speed 2.
The government's long-awaited integrated rail plan for the North and Midlands, promised by Boris Johnson back in early 2020, has been delayed again, adding to the atmosphere of jeopardy, not only around HS2's northern extension, but around a new high-speed line between Leeds and Manchester, also promised by the PM, known as Northern Powerhouse Rail.
And they've reduced the...
On the ground in Leeds, civic leaders warn that halting high-speed rail in the Midlands would be nothing short of a betrayal of the government's levelling up promises.
The government want us to level up. We need HS2 as part of that plan.
Some experts say the priority for places like Leeds is local connections. The government should focus on improving them first. How do you feel about that?
But it's not either or. London doesn't have to choose. Why does the North have to choose between connections between a capital, big cities and local connections? It's really important that we get that whole piece.
Something is going on in Whitehall over HS2. Newsnight has heard that both the Treasury and the Department for Transport have effectively lost confidence in the management of HS2 Limited, the public body charged with delivering this £100 billion plus infrastructure project. That's on account of its repeated optimism bias over timings and cost. We've also heard from people close to the company that it seems hostile to accountability.
Some are adamant that stopping HS2 in its tracks at Birmingham would be the right call.
My message would be radical. I would cancel the whole thing now and put the money to improving the existing services between Birmingham, Sheffield, Leeds, Manchester via Crewe and across the Pennines, because that's where the demand is, and that is where the levelling up will really benefit. At the moment, it's levelling up towards London, and who wants to see more commuters going into London?
So is HS2 to the north facing the chop? Are the businesses and landlords here on Leeds South Bank, which were counting on its arrival, destined to be disappointed. Well, the project certainly has its detractors in Whitehall. But those close to the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, who is himself a Yorkshire MP, insist that he is not planning to cut the northern legs of HS2 or to can Northern Powerhouse Rail. They stress that both will ultimately go ahead, although they insist as well that it will be under a very different company from HS2 Limited. Crucially, one with closer links to Northern civic leaders.
But how well placed is that confidence, especially given considerable and multiplying other post-pandemic spending pressures facing the Chancellor? Until that integrated rail plan appears, nerves about high-speed rail north of Birmingham will not be settled. This particular train has certainly not yet safely arrived.
Ben Jewell. Joining me now is Henry Murison, the director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, and the Conservative MP, Andrew Bridgen. Good evening to both of you. First of all, Henry Murison, you are backing HS2, but shouldn't you be backing the Northern Powerhouse Rail? Because surely it leads to Manchester across the north of England. That's where the congestion is, and that's where there's most to be gained.
I think the challenge is, Kirsty, that if we were in the south of England talking about this, we wouldn't be asked to choose. No one's had to choose between Crossrail and link to France. So the challenge is that those projects are also closely related. So if you cancel HS2 and the northern legs, you lose key stretches of the Northern Powerhouse Rail network. So Manchester Airport Station on HS2, also a critical part of Northern Powerhouse Rail, the links between Leeds and Sheffield that we're building as part of the Northern Powerhouse Rail network, they depend on HS2. So the two projects are absolutely linked together, and what we need to do is integrate them, not cancel one of them.
Well, let's just be clear. We're at 100 billion and counting for the HS2 project. Have you got all the money in place for the cross-country? I mean, is it there? And who's going to give you it? Because Rishi Sunak's certainly not desperately keen to put his hand in his pocket again.
I mean, the Chancellor has been one of probably the most steadfast supporters of that line across the Pennines. And the point is that we do have the money in the National Infrastructure Commission assessment for these key projects. Originally, Northern Powerhouse Rail was going to have to wait for Crossrail 2 to be completed in London. It now looks like, because of the delays with Crossrail, that's unlikely to be the sequencing. So there is money in the Infrastructure Commission's original assessment to be able to put this on the nation's credit card, because it is only about building it and then paying it back.
Yes, paying it back.
Is significant. And the challenge is, Kirsty, if you don't build these projects, we're not going to be able to level up productivity in the north of England. We won't get those higher tax revenues the Chancellor needs.
Well, let me just put that to Andrew Bridgen. You've signed up to the levelling up agenda. You hear people at Andy Street, the West Midlands Mayor, saying we absolutely need this. If you abandon this project on HS2, the levelling up agenda is in shreds, isn't it? It is the kind of flagship project.
No, we need east-west communication links, linking the great cities of the north and the great cities of the Midlands to create a critical mass to buttress against the draw of London. The fact is that the better the communication links from the Midlands and the north to London, the faster it sucks talent and money out of our regions. This is to feed London. It isn't going to level up the Midlands or the north at all.
So, wait a minute, you're prepared to have bad train connections and poor train connections with the capital. That, in a sense, is not part of your agenda, to allow people from the north, the northwest and the northeast to get to London quickly, efficiently and supposedly cheaply.
Well, that's what someone in London decided what the Midlands and the north need to make them happy is they need to get to London faster. Quite frankly, Kirsty, that's insulting. We could spend this money far better in the region, sorting out our own infrastructure problems, which would immediately enhance the lives and the economic prosperity of our own regions. We don't need to get to London faster. Phase one's going to cost £70 billion. That's more than double the original budget in 2013 of the whole project. And my constituents in the East Midlands, North West Leicestershire, we've already had 8 years of blight. There's no plans to start building the Eastern Leg anytime soon. We'd certainly have at least 25 years of blight before we got any benefit. And the benefit is marginal in a post-COVID economy.
But Henry Murison, you want the project turned on its head and you want to start from Leeds to Sheffield. You know that's never going to happen.
I think it is going to happen, Kirsty. So the best payback of the route is actually the Eastern Leg. And the problem with Andrew's position is that at the moment it takes 2 hours to get from Nottingham to Leeds. So it is those regional links that actually the Eastern leg in particular improves. The Eastern leg is not predominantly about getting to London faster. It's actually about improving regional connectivity. So I want those better links to the East Midlands. Andrew's position cuts the East Midlands off from Sheffield and Leeds. It's nearer cities other than Birmingham. I think that is the wrong position. What we need to do is connect the East Midlands to the north of England and get the benefits that come from that in terms of giving a bigger travel to work area for cities like Sheffield.
Andrew Bridgen, if the government was to pull the plug on the company with 10 years to go, more decision-making would be made in the north over this decade. Wouldn't that help?
The money needs to be distributed to the regions from the original budget.
And I think that's the new plan, isn't it? Isn't that
the project needs to be pulled. I doubt if 8 years ago, if we'd said to Nottingham, Sheffield, Leeds, Manchester, here's £10 billion each for your economic development, they wouldn't have got together and said, well, let's build a railway to London. It's a white elephant that's got bigger and bigger on taxpayers' cash. It's been mismanaged. It's unloved, unwanted, and it's unaffordable. And it's unaffordable for the government. How can they refuse extra money for social care or any other necessary project if we've got hundreds of billions of pounds to waste on HS2?
But you're out of kilter with a lot of other senior Conservatives. You look at Ben Bradley, runs a huge council. HS2 is more than a railway. It's fundamental to our vision of levelling up.
I'm not out of kilter with the public opinion in the East Midlands and most of the country. It's a vote loser as well. And if it had a business case, all the government would have to have done is issue the planning permission and the City of London would build it. No private sector investment whatsoever from the very beginning, and the business case has deteriorated and deteriorated as the costs have spiralled. It's a bit like Macbeth. If it's to be stopped now, if it's to be done, it is best it's done quickly, because my constituents and the East Midlands have suffered the blight and the economic paralysis from this for long enough.
Henry Mearson, let's look at the figures. It started off as 33 billion. 33 billion. Now it's more than 100 billion. It's 33 million pounds a mile, an eye-watering amount. It's the biggest infrastructure, most expensive infrastructure project in Europe. You know, another decade. Can you put your hand on your heart and say it's not going to double in another decade?
I think I can, Kirsty, because as you and Ben Chews pointed out this evening, it's unlikely this project will be delivered in the same way as phase one. And the challenges of building a railway in a place that is expensive to buy property as central London, parts of North London, the home counties, is the problem we have. And so
what he's actually saying is that the Midlands and the North will get no mitigation, so there won't be any tunnelling under our villages or towns. We'll just have the railway right next to the houses. That's not acceptable.
I haven't interrupted you, Andrew. The point is we've already bought people like Andrew's home, others who've been affected by this. HS2 Limited have done a good job, I believe, at trying to protect...
Well, one final question to you, Henry Mearson. A final question to you. You know, we have got an autumn statement. We've got the possibility that power is going to be removed from the HS2 company, and there's going to presumably be an overarching kind of czar of HS2, you know, with publicly accountable northern figures involved. Would you be prepared to see the Chancellor put an ultimate and absolute cap on the money that he's prepared to spend to see this project through? An absolute cap?
I would, Kirsty, because I think actually what we need to do is give northern leaders and those in the Midlands the opportunity to prioritise these schemes based on an envelope, rather than give money to a company that hasn't got a record of sticking to their commitments on cost. I do think we need a different delivery model for the Eastern leg. HS2 Limited haven't done any work on the project now since before the Oakley review, so the time is right to identify the right model to deliver this railway, and that does mean Network Rail playing a much bigger role. This railway has to be integrated with the existing rail network, particularly so the early phases that we would argue, like between Leeds and Sheffield, can be used for regional connectivity, as well as eventually becoming part of the full HS2 network.
Thank you both very much indeed. I'm afraid I have to stop you. Thank you very much indeed.